the shadow is like what's bad about you, in inverted commas, right? What's bad about us are negative aspects, and I don't believe in negative and positive. I think there are helpful and unhelpful qualities that we have depending on the moment. And so the way I hold shadow work is about exploring everything that's kind of below our line of awareness. So if you think there's like a line in our awareness, what's above the line, we're really conscious of, we know it about ourselves already. Oh yeah, this is how I behave, this is my sense of humor, this is my sort of typical reaction to this situation. I shut down emotionally, or I shut down physically, or whatever it is. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening below our line. And so the shadow work is about going below and seeing what's below that surface and bringing it up into our awareness, up into our consciousness, up into our understanding.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me at the Warriors at Work show. Today, I bring to you an interview I did with Robert Mulhall, who is the CEO of Kripalu. Kripalu is the country's leading yoga and meditation retreat center situated in the beautiful Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. They attract very well-known speakers, experts in various modalities that are in the yoga, mindfulness, living a better life sphere is how I would characterize it. And I was really intrigued by Robert's background. And so he sat down with me and talked to us about his personal philosophies, his leadership philosophies. And we break down a lot of really interesting aspects to who he is and what he has found to be a successful strategy in terms of leading, particularly as a CEO who took the helm of an organization in January of 2021. So it is my absolute pleasure to bring to you a conversation with someone who is so deeply passionate about things like peace and justice and freedom in our world. Enjoy. Welcome, Robert, to the Warriors at Work show. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So here's what's so interesting. You are the first CEO that I have interviewed that is personally and professionally grounded in some principles that are near and dear to my heart, like coaching, like yoga, like meditation. You're also the first CEO that I've interviewed that uses language that's rooted in wellness and our connectedness as human beings. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons I was really intrigued to have this conversation with you. So it's a little outside the traditional kind of business vernacular, but it really gets back into who we are as human beings and how important that is to leading and living. And before we get into the role that you've assumed in January of 2021, leading Kripalu, which, by the way, anybody that's watching or listening, that's the country's leading yoga and meditation retreat center situated in the most spectacular place in the Berkshire Mountains. I want to go back to your history and background. So you're born in Ireland, so everybody's going to hear your magnificent accent. You're a certified coach. You were a global consultant who worked in places like India, Africa. You're also a certified public accountant, which is very handy, I'm sure, as CEO. And you spent 2 years getting certified in meditation under Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach, which that blew me away. So when you sit back and you reflect on this journey that Robert has been on that brought you to Kripalu, like, how would you describe your path? I just gave a very traditional kind of intro, but how would you describe it?
I think I change this answer all the time when I get asked a question like this, but it's got something to do with approaching my life and my career not as a ladder to be climbed, but a jungle gym to be explored.
Ooh.
And that has allowed me to play in many different sort of fields and industries and worlds with many different roles without always feeling like I have to be sort of climbing somewhere, because that climbing seems to limit the possibility of where I can explore. And then connecting that with, for me, it's always been driven by a real deep sense of purpose, which I got from my parents and I got from the school that I went to in Ireland. And that purpose for me is very connected to service and freedom. So how do I show up in the world and serve with all of my skills and talents, but then at the same time, how do I create a greater sense of freedom internally for people as well as externally?
Freedom. Wow. So tell me what freedom means to you when you say that word.
Freedom for me in an internal freedom is allowing myself to be just as I am without resisting my anger or my shame or my fear or my joy and happiness. It's just allowing me to be just who I am in my most authentic expression in that moment without anything to prove to myself or to anybody else. And then externally, that freedom is connected to equity and justice in the world and a real sense of this deep feeling that we have all that we need in this world for us all to be taken care of. And it's simply a matter of creating more freedom in our systems, in the way we approach our problems, in the way we think about each other, to allow all people have what they need to really thrive in this world.
That's very beautiful. And I was just reflecting on those ideas as someone who took the helm in a worldwide pandemic. I'm curious, how would you describe that journey? So if you think back to when you assumed responsibility as CEO of Kripalu to now, talk to us about what that's been like for you and for the team.
Yeah, and the team might have a very different answer to my answer. I'm sure they would add much more color for sure. But for me personally, it has been unbelievably rewarding and unbelievably challenging. So I've never felt more alive. Sometimes that aliveness has brought me great smiles, and sometimes it's just been my head in my hands at my desk. It's such an interesting time to be leading in an organization, a nonprofit like Kripalu, which is so massively impacted by the pandemic. We closed for 18 months. We had to lay off 95% of our staff. And our model is people coming through the doors and being on retreat here. And we would, in a non-COVID year, we would have over 40,000 people come to our retreat center in the Berkshires to go on retreat. And that is how we generate revenue as a nonprofit. And so all of that just shut down for 18 months. And was a really big hit. And we went into a much smaller team and recalibrated and put things online and continued to serve our community and sort of thread that needle, and then made a decision that, with no certainty, in January 2021, the vaccines were just starting to be rolled out. Nobody knew what impact they were going to have. We had no idea if we could open or not. And we just said, I remember getting the team together and just saying, we have to open. We just have to open. And we have to move towards a target. And even if that target changes, the closer we get to it, we have to have a target, because otherwise we're just there was a sense of we're in a ship, in a boat, in the sea, and we're just kind of getting walked around a little bit. So we set a course, and amazingly, we just talked about this recently, that we set a course with a timeline, and within, give or take, a couple of weeks, we hit every milestone that we had set. Without knowing that would be possible. And that hasn't come without cost. We're completely affected by the labor shortage, availability of amazing staff. And so all of these things have had an impact on how we've been able to show up and the balance in the system. But we also know that don't feel like that's going to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been this sort of process of leading with a real goal or a vision for reopening the center, but then also knowing that when we closed, the world was going to be completely changed when we reopened the center. So we made a commitment to ourselves to say we have to change too. And so we went into a process of deep reflection and with the board and developed a strategic plan that allowed us to be different and to show up different, not just operationally, but also in our purpose. And that was about expanding from being an organization that was just focused on individual transformation and healing to an organization that focused on individual and collective transformation and healing. And that's a big expansion for us. But as we look at the world, we know that there's no real separation between those things. You know, my individual well-being is completely bound up in your individual well-being. And all those together are our collective well-being and our collective flourishing and our collective liberation. And so we didn't want to separate those things out anymore. We wanted to hold those as one purpose for us as an organization. So we've been able to live into that, and that's allowed us to show up differently. But that's also forcing us to really look at new ways of operating and creating greater access to our programming, helping us really look at how do we reach more people who seem to be really either really hungry for something more in their life, because they want to sort of thrive and flourish more and live their best life, or for people that are really struggling. And there's a lot of people struggling right now. The question I often ask groups during when I get them together now is like, for the last 2 years, over the last 2 years, what did you lose? And everybody has something that they lost, whether it was a person because they lost them through a COVID death, or they lost a relationship, or they lost a job, or they lost a place of belonging. Everybody has lost something in this time. And we haven't had the time to really kind of grieve those things. And what I find, and how that's tied to like the leadership piece, is that's the truth for all of our staff. And we've hired back so many staff now. And people are coming back in, and these are amazing people that just give so much. It's just remarkable to see this group of people work and serve the way they do. But they're also coming in with all of that experience from the 2 years of a pandemic. And we're constantly in that conversation of how do we meet ourselves in this moment? How do we hold and support each other in this moment without trying to sort of push those things aside, which often happens in organizations? It's like, look, personal is personal, professional is professional. Let's keep them separate. And the Irish say, it's slightly different, but it's, the idea that what some people say, well, what's in the past is in the past. And the Irish say the past is in the room sitting beside you all the time. And it's true in work. And we're certainly trying to engage in that conversation with as many organizations as want to have that conversations. How do you really show up for your employees now? How do we really collectively care and build cultures of care in organizations so that people can have that deep resilience to meet these moments and the challenges that will come in the future, but also from that place of greater well-being and mindfulness in the culture, that we can start to actually shift some of the systems that are imbalanced right now, the systems that really prioritize productivity over individual well-being. And, I'm sure people are listening to this right now. It's like, but we've got all these targets to meet. We've got to do it. We got, like, how do you, and I always hear the words, but practically speaking, Robert, how do you, and for me, it's, how do we not separate out idealism and pragmatism? How do we actually hold those two things together? And I think it's the holding of those two things as one thing allows us to actually find solutions that hold this sort of view of the human being as central in our work. And one of my mentors told me this story when I was running a leadership development organization, and it's about the golden goose. It's one of the fables from Europe, and one day the farmer comes out to his barn and there's a goose, and it's laid all the other geese have just laid normal eggs, and this one has laid a golden egg. And he goes, "This is fantastic. takes the golden egg, brings it in, shows his wife. Oh my God, we got a golden egg. That's incredible. Next day, there's another golden egg. I said, wow. And every day for the week, this golden egg is being laid. And then the farmer says, this is great, but you know what? I'd love to get all of that gold now. If I got it all now, if I got more of it now, then I'd be able to do more, right? I'd be able to fix the other barn and maybe buy a few more acres over here and a couple of horses or whatever. And it was that idea of more that led the farmer then to, unfortunately, kill the goose and opened it up and try to get the gold. And obviously opened up the goose and there was no gold there. And one of the sort of morals of the story is that if you just look after the goose that's laying you the golden eggs, if you feed it, if you care for it, if you shelter it, if you give it what it needs, it will continue to give you gold every day. But if you push it to give you more and more than its capacity, it will stop giving you gold. And I think the harsh reality is that we have systems in organizations that are trying to force gold, too much gold, too fast. And people are burning out at electrifying rates. And
yes,
organizations are losing their best talent needlessly. And so a conversation that we're in and that we've been in is what's enough, not what's more. Like, not how do we grow revenue, but how do we actually find a truly sustainable model that feels like enough, that feels like we're truly living into our purpose as an organization, but is not trying to, not just trying to prioritize more all the time.
Wow. You said so much there that resonated with me. And I am seeing sort of like an extraordinary amount of people that are experiencing burnout and grief, and not looking at it. So anxiety is up, panic attacks are up, all kinds of decision fatigue, and just not a connection to time out.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why does it matter? Is this the place for you? How are you contributing? It's so incredible. I'm gonna pull back on some of the things that you said, because I want to understand a little bit more. You made mention of a lot of things there, and I'm curious, are there particular skills and ideologies? You talked about purpose and freedom, but I want to go even deeper. Like, when you think about you as CEO, what have you learned in the arc of your career that you really rely on now? I mean, you have such a diverse background. You've sort of seen all parts of life. Mm-hmm. What is it you're really digging into right now and really leveraging?
A few things, and these are connected to my sort of view of the world, which is, I believe in a sort of a big source of power. That's not like dictating power over us, that it's something that just kind of flows through all aspects of life. But it's one that I'm not in charge of the outcome. And so when Omicron was hitting in January, again, another big wave of COVID, how is this going to impact our organization? I remember sitting in my office and the fear and the anxiety and the stress is building. I could feel it in my body. And my typical response has been, I've got a lot of sort of willpower and ability to kind of move things and drive things forward. So that's my usual response. It's kind of like the superhero response. Like, get a little cape on me and go out there and try and solve everything. And I just sat there in my office and said, I'm not doing it this way. I'm just not doing it this way. There has to be a different way to do this. And I took a moment, and I took 10 minutes, and I just sat in silence. And then I just sort of had a conversation with life. And I said, okay, here's what I know my job is, what my responsibility is. My side of the road is that I am here to pull my leadership team together, to make a really good plan, to make sure the board is aligned with that plan. And then we're going to go and implement that plan and, pivot with that plan as needs be. But basically, my job is to get a plan in place and live into that plan. And I said, my job is not to determine the outcome and to hold the weight of the outcome. And I sort of said, Irish people do this. I said, look, life, your job is to determine the outcome. And here's my preference. My preference is that we sustain as an organization and thrive long into the future. But I can't determine that outcome. Actually, like the pandemic has clearly shown me and everybody else that thought we could, that we could control the world, that we can't. And so I said, okay, if that's one of the big lessons from this, how can I actually live into that I can't control this? So I'm going to stop trying to control it. And the amount of ease that came into me in that moment, and that has sustained since then, it's just been profound. And so then I've one of the big things that I've shifted in my own leadership is letting go of this, trying to control the outcome. But that doesn't mean that I'm not showing up fully, that I'm not doing a lot of hard work, not really thinking about great plans and trying to strategize for the future. It just means I've taken off this burden of like the world is on my shoulders, and that I singularly am the person that has to hold all of this up on everybody else's behalf. And I know, so all the CEOs that I talk to in all the different industries, this is what we feel. We feel that we are the single point of failure, responsibility, success, everything ultimately, that it sits and rides on our shoulders. And be a strong encouragement I have to anybody is, can you start to shift that perspective? And what would that look and feel like for you? The second one is, it's about centering love. And I've been talking about this since my days in PricewaterhouseCoopers. And PricewaterhouseCoopers in Ireland was a fantastic organization to work with. But most companies don't talk about love. But as soon as you step outside the boardroom or the office block, that's what people are centering their lives around: relationships and love. And so it's like, why can't we talk about that at the workplace? Why can't we be organizations that care very deeply? Why can't we be organizations that are full of compassion? Why can't we be organizations that when somebody's having the hardest moment at work, why can't we hold a sense of like love for this person, like deep care for this person, that this is a human being in front of me? And what would I want in those moments? That's what I want. That's what I need. And so it's about, for me, the second piece is about centering love. And then the third piece is, this is a time to be bold, a time to be, my intention at the moment is can I live fearlessly with courage? And that's a real challenge. And to really look at where fear shows up and where that limits how I show up as a leader or as a father or anything else. And can I really just notice fear and just not push it aside, not go, you've no place here, but just kind of hold it up here to the side and say, oh, hey, friend, yeah, you can be here, but it doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing what needs to be done. And so I recently bought a mountain bike to play with that. I said, right, if fear is my current thing that I'm going to practice with. So I bought a mountain bike, and I used a mountain bike as a teenager, but I always remember having fear then. My other friends seemed to be much more courageous. So I said, okay, I'm going to go buy a mountain bike. And I recently took it up into the woods here. And I just cycled around, and I just noticed every time there was fear. And I just said it to myself. I said, oh, I'm afraid. Now I'm not. Oh, now I'm afraid. Now I'm not. Oh, I'm afraid. And just that radical honesty with myself is kind of the next piece that I'm really trying to lean into. My sort of default personality and my training as a kid from my wonderful parents and my society that I grew up with is to be somebody who's got it all together, and to not show that vulnerability, not even to myself, not to admit that. And it's got this kind of inauthenticity to it. And so I'm just stepping into this place of, you know what? I'm okay if I'm afraid. I know that I'm still a good human being. I'm still a likable man. I'm still a good leader, even if I'm afraid. And it doesn't mean I'm failing. So I'm giving myself much more permission to feel those things and to say those things out loud to myself, and then say it to my team. I sent an email out to the whole organization last week saying, I'm feeling so much frustration and so much fear. And I'm sure you all are too. And let's just care for each other.
Wow. I love how you have built a healthy relationship with fear. Yeah, I often play with fear through the language of, is that real or
Mm,
did I make it up?
yep.
And that often, even just naming it, right? So I'm feeling fearful, I'm feeling frustrated, is incredibly cathartic.
Yep.
And it also allows for you to acknowledge your humanness. And you made mention of this too, being a very production oriented society, particularly, I think it in the last 2 years, it's like this hyper focus and attention on execution and making sure we're meeting our goals. And yeah, so there's this transactional texture to everything. And we've lost the relationship with the fact that we're human beings.
Right.
So I think even just starting to talk about how we feel is a pathway back to ourselves and saying, all right, well, if we were to do this a little differently. So I just love what you just talked about with fear. Something that I think we could all play with, me certainly, not on a mountain bike per se, but on other ways. I want to talk about something that we talked about in our initial conversation. You shared with me how interested you are in doing something called shadow work. So first of all, I'd love for you to describe what shadow work's all about and why is it important to leading?
Yeah. So shadow work has been around for a long, long time. Even just that phrase, I can't remember who coined it, but it's been like this kind of practice, or this work is, it's been around since the beginning since we've been gathering as human beings. But a lot of the time it gets defined as the shadow is like what's bad about you, in inverted commas, right? What's bad about us are negative aspects. And I don't believe in negative and positive. I think there are helpful and unhelpful qualities that we have depending on the moment. And so the way I hold shadow work is about exploring everything that's kind of below our line of awareness. So if you think there's like a line in our awareness, what's above the line, we're really conscious of, we know it about ourselves already. Oh yeah, this is how I behave. This is my sense of humor. This is my sort of typical reaction to the situation. I shut down emotionally, or I shut down physically, or whatever it is. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening below our line, right? Some people think about it as like an iceberg. We can see the top of the iceberg, but actually there's so much more to the iceberg below the surface of the ocean. And so the shadow work is about going below and seeing what's below that surface and bringing it up into our awareness, up into our consciousness, up into our understanding. But it's bringing forth everything that maybe we don't love about ourselves, maybe not our best qualities, but also bringing forward our gold and our beautiful qualities. So it's not just about focusing on sort of like our wounds, or the pieces that, we find harder to accept about ourselves or other people. And what I notice is that people starting on that journey of shadow work often start in that place of, well, wow, I didn't realize I was this angry. Actually, I've never expressed anger before, and the more they get into it, the more they start to bring that up above the line of awareness, then the work is really actually about claiming what we're powerful at and what our gifts are. And there seems to be this point where there's like a point of development, I think, in leadership, where we're really willing to say, this is who I am. This is my power. This is what I bring to the table in its fullness. And I do it really well. And a lot of people will say those words, but to actually feel that in their body with a deep resonance and a deep alignment and a deep confidence, I think a lot of us don't really feel that resonance. And so that's what shadow work is. It's about bringing all of that forward. And so I'll give you two examples for me. So something that I was really not aware of only until the last 12 months was how much I showed up as like a martyr, somebody that was willing to say yes to things that were really no for me. And that showed up in a particular part of my life, more so in my personal life. And I didn't see it. I didn't see how big that was in my life. And it got revealed through a few things that happened in life. And then I did some work with a therapist. And I was like, wow, this is really here. And so then I was able to see it and then say, okay, so what is my new commitment to myself? What are the behaviors that I want to sort of shift and pivot around? And how can I kind of track that change? So that was one piece about one of the qualities that I didn't think was serving me. But another aspect was also about this sort of what I'm really good at. And as an Irish person, you're not supposed to really be good at anything. You're certainly not supposed to admit it. You're not allowed to talk about it. You have to be demure and have false humility at all times, because all the good Irish folks will definitely bring you down.
Yes.
Get you off your high horse, keep you in your place. That's what I love about being in America, where it's kind of the opposite. It's like there's a real buoyancy to a lot of cheerleading goes on in America, which is great. But it was this aspect of, as a leader, I can be really, really still in times of deep chaos or in times of deep transformation. Like, I don't get flustered in those moments. And I can sort of hold that for the team when they're in a sort of a space of uncertainty or confusion, and really bringing that forward and really owning that about myself has been also another journey for me. But now it allows me to sort of show up and say, yeah, that's part of what I bring to the table. That's part of why I'm in this role. It's part of one of my Jedi skills or my superpowers or whatever words, right? My ninja skills. And owning those equally is really important for me. Not just the piece that I want to like not do anymore, but it's also the piece that I want to do, that I want to bring forward fully, and not be worried about the old stories that I might hear, the old echoes with Irish voices saying, oh, don't get ahead of yourself. I don't think that's why we're here. I think we're here to fully express who we are. I think we're here on this beautiful earth, in these incredible relationships, in these wonderful organizations, just to be who we are. And one of my mentors 20 years ago said, if you walk into any room and think you have something to prove, then you're not free. You're not free, and you're not in the present moment. And he said, so like, pay attention to every time you're trying to prove something. And I was talking to somebody actually this week. I was doing a piece of work with an organization, and somebody was saying, I've still got something to prove. And I said, well, what have you got to prove? And I said, I've got to prove to my father that I can be financially independent. He was a youngish leader. And I thought about that later. I said, you don't have anything to prove, and sort of said all those things, but I thought about it later, and I said, I really don't think we've anything to prove to anybody else or to ourselves, but there might be some things we want to see if we can do. Right? We want to see if we can climb that mountain or go mountain biking without fear, or become financially independent of our parents, but not from a place of proving it, from a place of like experimentation, and sort of like it's a science experiment, rather than all of my worth as a human being is bound up in whether I succeed or not at this thing. And when we can free that, when I can free myself of that, then I can walk into a room with so much like internal spaciousness and freedom to be in any conversation. I don't feel as defended. I don't feel like I have to sort of like force my point of view. I can be in this generative emergent space with people and in that space, that's where the real magic happens. I think that's where true creativity happens and innovation. That's where people are really met, really heard, really feel cared for as employees. But it's also where people grow and transform.
That is a revolutionary idea, because I'm thinking of proving in so many different domains, right? So we have to prove our value, our worth in terms of our role and responsibility, prove our value, our worth in terms of we just got promoted, everybody, all eyes are on you, they're measuring your progress, or even proving your value and worth when someone says you can't do that.
Yeah,
I know that is like a hot button for me. That is something that I'm working on. I love it when people say, that's not going to work. And I'm always like, well, just watch me. So I'm proving it for them, not for me.
Yeah.
And you couldn't be more right when you get back to that place. I do a lot of work around executive presence. And one of the philosophies that I will often say is people with presence all have something very much in common. And that is they have a high regard for themselves. And it's not arrogance. It is not cockiness. It is a knowing that they are okay. They've got whatever coping skills are needed, regardless of the circumstance, so they're anchored to something that is core to them. And everyone has access to it, but we put a lot of things in the way that block our pathway to it. So I think what you're talking about, I mean, that expression or that saying that your mentor shared with you is so amazing. So amazing. I'll
just add that, like, obviously I'm in a white male body, and that means society basically asks me to prove myself less, right? So I also acknowledge that I have to prove myself less than somebody in a female body or in a different gendered body than me. I have to prove myself less because I'm in white skin as opposed to a person of color. I'm an able-bodied person, etc. So I have to prove myself less. So that's all true, and that's an important context to all of this, I think. And even within that, it's not about not showing up and demonstrating and showing our capacity to its fullest, but it's not doing that so that somebody else likes us or somebody else approves of us or we somehow meet somebody else's standard of who we should be.
Yes.
But can we do this for ourselves, for the sort of what I call like the drumbeat of purpose that beats in all of us? Can we do it because it brings us joy and it brings us fulfillment rather than because we're expected to? And Howard Thurman is beautiful preacher who, I say this and I'm almost sure this is correct. I think he was one of the first preachers in the United States to integrate his congregation. And he has this beautiful quote of, "Do not do what the world expects of you. Do what makes you come alive, because that's what the world needs, people who have come alive." And it's that idea, if we could just be fully alive, we will, the things that we could get up to in beautiful and crazy ways would be fantastic.
Yeah. How do you bring this idea of the shadow work into day-to-day interactions and meetings?
Yeah. So because I'm a trained coach, like the poor folks that report into me, we have these kind of conversations. And we talk about, we slow everything down when it's clear that something else is happening beyond just what we're talking about. We say, so we ask these really sort of inquisitive questions like, okay, what's behind that? Where do you feel that in your body?
Yeah.
Close your eyes for a minute. Really feel into it. Who do you remind yourself of in this moment? In some cases around the proving piece, it's like, who are you trying to impress in this moment?
Wow.
It's not me.
Wow.
So who else is in the room with us? And so we play with some of those kind of questions. But also as a leadership team, we recently looked at what's known as the drama triangle. And so this is about a piece of shadow work. So we looked at the drama triangle, and at the top of the triangle, you have the victim role. And that's the person, they sort of hold this phrase of like, why me? This is being done to me. Then the next corner of the triangle is the rescuer. This is the person that sort of creates a codependency with the victim. They keep them in the victim place. They look like they're supporting them, but they're actually keeping them in the victim place by validating their experience, but never moving to real solutions and never actually empowering the victim. And then there's so there's the victim, the rescuer, and I'm going to look over my shoulder because it's up here, the persecutor. And the persecutor is the person who says it's all their fault. And you get this in systems, in organizations, in families, everything. People play these different roles. We sometimes default to one role more than others, but we're all usually dancing around this triangle the whole time. And it keeps us in a place of drama. It a lot of energy goes into staying in a victim stance or in a persecutor stance or a rescuer stance. And the encouragement is to notice that. So we did this as a leadership team. We introduced the framework. We got people to talk about where they default to often, and where they see themselves showing up. And then we said, okay, so the invitation is to notice that, and then to start to see how can you move from victim into creator. So you're creating your reality rather than just having a reality put on you. From persecutor to challenger. So you can use your voice to challenge things when they're not going well. And then from rescuer to coach. So how do you coach the victim into the creative space? And so we're looking at that as a leadership team now, which is about, first of all, identifying our shadow, and then finding the more sort of aware or more mature way to operate in some of these things. Another thing that we did recently, we just named it. Most organizations have this. We have somewhere in our DNA is a scarcity mentality. It's this idea of there is not enough. And then there's also usually attached to this some identity of we're not enough. And pretty much every individual in the Western world has this idea. And organizations are a collection of all of those individuals. So of course, organizations also have this. Most organizations never talk about this stuff. But I guarantee you it's swimming in the waters. It's completely subconsciously built into how we approach revenue targets and budgeting, how we approach, how we care for people and what we invest in. And it's all about fear. And so we, as an organization, I just sent a video to the whole staff naming these two things. I said, these are in our system. So we're going to name it, and then we're going to watch for it. And I said, my practice is that I'm good enough and that there is enough. They're the two things I'm telling myself on a daily basis. And I said, I can't do this alone. So can we all just live into that a little bit? Can we live into this idea of I'm enough and there is enough. We're enough. There is enough. And so we've just been playing with that gently as an organization, and there's more work to come on that. And
I was smiling as you were talking, I'm imagining the practical business person in me is thinking about all of the very A-type, high IQ, production-oriented people that would think, if I came into you and I just wanted to review a budget, or I wanted to get your buy-in on something that I was trying to bring forth, how would we do this in a way where I wasn't interested in doing that level of deep dive? So I was smiling, thinking people probably have to pick their moments. It's okay, how I'm coming in, what language I'm using, what mood I'm in, what mood you're in.
Yeah. So it's all about time and place. Is this the right time? Is this the right place for these kind of conversations? It's not every conversation is like that. Sometimes you're literally just looking at Excel spreadsheets and talking about the budget. But it's also, as a leader, right? You talked about presence. That presence is about being present. And when we're truly present, I believe this is true of every human being, that we can sense, not just think what's going on, we can also sense what's going on with our other human beings. We have a feeling that maybe they're experiencing something. And even if we kind of call ourselves very logical and left-brained individuals and all these kind of phrases, no, I'm a numbers person, I'm not a creative person, all that.
Right.
That's true. And I do believe that every human being has this capacity to sense. And it's in that sensing we go, something just feels a little bit off here. There's a little bit of dissonance, or there's a little bit of misalignment, or there's something unspoken, or there's something extra here. And it's that feeling where you go, can we just slow down for a second? Is there anything else going on here? And usually what I find is that the people are they might be like, no, everything's fine. It's are you sure? Because maybe it's just me, but I can feel something, and I can actually usually feel it in my body. So I'm like, I know I got a little bit of tension or a pinch in my chest. You feeling good about this budget? Do you have any concerns? I'm like, well, actually, I am concerned that we're under investing here based on our strategic priorities. I'm like, okay, let's have that conversation. And so I see it being able to be played out to have really practical, positive, or helpful outcomes for organizations and businesses. But it takes slowing down, and it takes trusting that sensing. But it's also being willing to say, this is how I'm going to lead.
Mm.
I'm going to lead as this. This is how I'm going to show up as a leader. I'm going to be willing to sort of sound a little bit different. I'm going to be willing to trust my sensing intuition rather than just what's rewarded in the workplace, which is sort of my logical thinking mind. And
I love that.
Yeah. And it's, again, this is the capacity that all human beings have, is to sort of play in these different spaces. Human beings are multidimensional. We've got all of this stuff inside of us, but often we're rewarding one very narrow expression of it. Same in school, right? We all went to school, and schools were, it's basically a Victorian education school system that was perfected like to help people pass certain tests, but it wasn't about truly educating people. And people learn in so many different ways and engage in so many different ways. And that's starting to change now in the education system slowly. But we continuously play to the sort of the dominant culture in our organizations, which doesn't give a lot of permission or space for this kind of conversation. And I think we're all missing out. I know in all of my consulting days, the organizations where it seemed to be the best place to work, the happiest employees, the organizations that were thriving, even if they weren't making the biggest profits, but they were truly thriving in a holistic way, they were the organizations that cared about this stuff too.
Yeah. It's just creating so much more consciousness to what we're doing and how we're doing it. I mean, I talk to people all day long that the word that I always think of is like untethered.
Yeah.
They're just up here floating and just grabbing hold of anything that's familiar.
Right.
And even just asking the question, what's going on? I couldn't agree with you more too, is attuning yourself to whoever you're speaking to, rather than thinking about what you're going to say next, what you're going to ask next, which is taking you away from what's happening right here.
Right.
It really is so, so powerful. Because I'm also curious from your perspective. Obviously, you're in the business of wellness, well-being, and goodness in the world. When you think about other leaders, other businesses that are following this and listening to this conversation, what could they learn from Kripalu that they could bring into their workplace? We talked about shadow work. We talked about this notion of being very conscious and present in conversations. What else, when you zoom out and you think of the world of wellness?
First of all, I'll say Kripalu is absolutely in the world of wellness and well-being in the world. But I think, and that's because we're really clear on what our purpose is. A lot of companies and employees in those companies think that they're in companies that aren't purpose-driven, that they're not really engaged in society in the same way. So people are like, oh, you work for a nonprofit, that's like extra special than something else. And I don't separate those things out in that way. I love the story of JFK in Cape Canaveral when they were building the shuttles down there. And he went around to everybody in the room and like, who are you? What do you do? And it's like chief scientist, chief mathematician, chief statistician, etc. And he's walking out the door and he stops to the custodian. And he says, what do you do here? And he said, as the guy's mopping the floor, he says, I help put men on the moon. And that guy was the only one who understood or answered in that way of like, what's the big reason I'm here? And there's a big reason for every employee in every organization. And the best organizations are helping people ground into that purpose constantly and daily. Because it's so hard to do this. It's so hard. All of this stuff is just so hard. And like post-pandemic, it is just harder. And so can we give people true purpose? Can we also, and I love Daniel Pink's work around this, can we give them true purpose? Give them an opportunity for true autonomy? And can we give them an opportunity for true mastery? And that's what brings people alive. I think in addition to that, Kripalu has these amazing programs here. So a lot of businesses come here and bring their staff on retreat here to spend time together in these 125 incredible acres. And just that change of venue, that place on this land, can be transformative for a team to think different. When you're in a small room, in a small space, or in a familiar place, you think in a small way and you think in a familiar way. But when you're in big expanses and you think, you're on the cliff top or the mountaintop, you feel bigger, you think bigger. And so that's one thing that we're trying to encourage people to do, is come here for those reasons. But then also there's an incredible amount of programming and training that we run here, stress resiliency training, well-being training, culture building training, all of these things for organizations, individuals and organizations and teams, to help them start to shift the culture in their organization. And then ideally so that they can be a ripple for organizations, and we can start to have ecosystem change. And I will say that a lot of the time businesses, and I talked about this a while ago at some conference, businesses talk about self-care. And I would say there's self-care is an aspect of care. And businesses that are going to thrive in the future, where people are going to want to work for them, are going to be businesses and organizations that think about care in general, care, internal care, care in the world. And the internal care is not about saying, here's a voucher for you as an individual to go do some, like to join a gym. Because then it's all the responsibility is on you as an individual to be taking care of yourself. But what I'm encouraging is all businesses to have care in their strategy. And so if they center care and equity and things like this, what are your strategic priorities start to look like? And where are you investing? My dad, who's passed away, went into one business that he was working with, and he said, you're developing these great products for the world. How much are you spending on research and development? And they said something like, 10% or 8% of their budget. And he says, okay, that's pretty good. How much do you spend on your people development? They're like, I don't know, about $10,000 a year or euro a year. And he says, the people are the ones that are making all of this happen. It's the golden goose. Are we investing in the people? And you talk to CEOs and you go, what's the hardest part of your job? They all will say the people. The human element is the hardest part. So I then always get confused. It's like, why are we not investing as much as we possibly can in the well-being and the development of those human beings? Because they're the ones driving the whole engine. If that starts to falter, if that's not aligned, if that's not thriving, then all those other practical, inverted commas, Excel spreadsheets, plans, none of it happens, or happens at such a cost that it's not sustainable.
So now I want to look out into the future, because I'm curious, when you think about the evolution of Kripalu and you as the leader, what do you see? What's coming down the road for Kripalu? What's coming down the road for Robert?
I honestly have no idea what's coming down the road for me. What I'll say is I just get whispers every now and then, and my life seems to just pivot. So I get a whisper, and I seem to be in India a couple of years later doing work, and I get a whisper, and then I'm in New York, and so I have no idea what's going to happen for me. I hope I can stay open enough to listening, and then honest enough to following through on those whispers that I get. But I know I've got a deep commitment to service and liberation, freedom. So it will be in those themes. I literally feel a dis-ease and an uncomfortableness in my body when I'm not in alignment around that. And with Kripalu, it's about living into this fuller expression of who it is. It's about doing that deep work in the shadow and bringing forward our confidence that we have something really special to offer this world. And that it's not something that's so like out of left field, but actually this is stuff that is truly needed in the mainstream. That well-being and the practices around that, so that we can be our freest and full and most fulfilled selves. You sit down with anybody and ask them, do you want to feel more ease in your life, more fulfillment, more freedom in your life? Everybody, like, who's not signing up for that?
Right.
And so can we bring that to more people and more places of influence, so that those influential places and those influential leaders will start to play a part in the sort of ecosystem ripple effect? Because it is ultimately, we need a culture change. We need a collective culture change. The culture we have developed, there's some beautiful parts to it, but there's some really broken, really imbalanced parts of it. And, literally in the United States every week, almost every day now, we're getting these big reminders of the imbalance in this country. And it's not just the United States, it's these stories all over the world. And how do we change the culture that we've co-created? How do we co-create a new culture so that we're in right relationship with this beautiful planet. We're in right relationship with each other. We're in right relationship with ourselves. And that we're so fractured at the moment. And Kripalu really wants to be in this connection, in this conversation of connection. How do we reconnect to ourselves, our true inner wisdom, and our internal guidance? How do we connect as community, even if we disagree on some of the hottest topics? How can we be in disagreement and still be together? Still be in South Africa, still be South Africans in Northern Ireland, still be from the island of Ireland, whether you see yourself as an Irish person or a British person. How can we still be in a togetherness? The world has got these really powerful examples of that. And I believe if we don't lean into that, and this is what Kripalu wants to lean into, is showing the world that we are enough and that there is a togetherness. And if we can lean into that at a cultural shift level, then we can create a more beautiful world.
Wow. What a way to end this conversation. So much here. So much. This is probably going to have resonance for me all day long. I'll be reflecting on different things, saying, that's interesting. Thank you, Robert, for sharing your heart and your piece of your soul in this conversation. And I feel really, really happy and grateful of the work that you're putting out into the world, and the team at Kripalu, and that such a magnificent place exists. So I wish you so much goodness in the months and days ahead.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Love these kind of conversations.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.